Hey, Arrows here to bring education on our civil liberties and responsibilities. The BORseries seeks to inform people of their constitutional rights as a means to protect themselves, their community, and our country as a whole. Knowing your role as an American citizen will undoubtedly help uplift our country and make it a better place for all people. So let's look at our constitutional amendments to see how they apply today. This is a 25th Amendment, A BORseries episode, written by Civic Roots and produced by Faceless Studios. Today we are going to cover the 25th Amendment of the Constitution. The 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified on February 10, 1967, in response to concerns about what happened if a president is unable to fulfill their duties due to illness, death, resignation, or removal from office. The amendment has 4 sections, each addressing different scenarios. Presidential succession. If the president dies, resigns, or is removed from office, the vice president becomes the president. This section was applied when President Richard Nixon resigned in 1974 and Vice President Gerald Ford became president. And to do this, the vice president and a majority of the cabinet must sign a written declaration stating that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The key requirement is that the vice president must agree. The cabinet alone cannot remove the president. So if the VP and the cabinet are all appointed by the presidency, this is a very unlikely thing to happen in order to remove the president from power. So let's continue on. Section 2. The vice presidential vacancy. If the vice president's office is vacant, the president nominates a new vice president who then must be confirmed by both the House and the Senate. This was used twice back in 1973 when Spiro Agnew resigned as vice president and Gerald Ford was appointed. In 1974, when Ford became president after Nixon resigned, he appointed Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. Section 3 of the 25th Amendment, temporary transfer of power. This is when the president can voluntarily transfer power to the vice president by sending a written declaration to the Speaker of the House and the Senate President pro tempore. So now the vice president becomes acting president until the president sends another declaration stating that they are ready to resume office. This has been invoked a few times when presidents underwent medical procedures. In 1985, Ronald Reagan transferred power to Vice President George H.W. Bush while undergoing surgery, though it was informal. And George W. Bush, in 2002 and 2007, transferred power to Vice President Dick Cheney during medical procedures. So in order for the vice president to become acting president, they must deliver the declaration to Congress, and then and only then can the vice president immediately assume the role of acting president. The president also is not officially removed, but they lose their powers until the matter is resolved. And again, this happens if the president was unable to fulfill their duties due to illness, death, resignation, or removal from office. By and large, I think it's safe to suspect that Mr. Trump will utterly refuse to step down as president, as though he were a 5-year-old child having a tantrum over having to share his own toys. If the president believes they are still fit for office, they can send a written declaration to Congress stating that they are capable of serving. And this is a good thing to have as a security measure for the presidency. It brings a balance to our system and how we deal with the illegal coup the President of the United States has been complicit in directing. Ultimately, the decision of an unfit president should be based on their policies and actions, behaviors, credentials, and state of health. We are learning just how destructive someone with power can be in our own country and just how valuable our institutions are for us and the rest of the world. We need to have structures for important debates about how to reform our institution to work for more people. And the place to start is removing unfit people from the White House. All right, let's get back to the 25th Amendment. So after the president sends a written declaration to Congress stating that they are capable of serving, if the vice president and cabinet dispute the president's claim of fitness, Congress must vote on the issue within 21 days. To permanently remove the president, a two-thirds vote in both the House and Senate is required. And if Congress fails to reach a two-thirds majority, the president remains in office. And the last section of the 25th Amendment, which to me seems most relevant to understand how we can preserve the important parts of government departments and institutions from any U.S. takeover of the billionaire class. Section 4, involuntary removal of the president. If a president becomes physically or mentally unable to fulfill their duties but refuses to step down, Section 4 allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare them unfit to serve. Congress then decides whether to permanently remove the president with a two-thirds vote you all know too well. Before the conception of the 25th Amendment, it was made clear that there was no mechanism for the removal of a president who was mentally incapacitated unless they resigned or were impeached. So now that we have another way to remove people from power, what will we do with this? Consider this. Back in 1987, some of President Ronald Reagan's administration privately discussed invoking the 25th Amendment due to concerns about his mental sharpness. Reagan was showing signs of forgetfulness and confusion in the Oval Office. However, it was never formally invoked, and Reagan continued to serve until 1989. In 1994, 5 years after leaving office, Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So this raised some speculation that his mental decline may have begun during his presidency. A more recent consideration invoking Section 4 of the 25th Amendment was back in 2021. President Donald Trump at the time, after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, several lawmakers and officials called for Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. They argued that Trump's role in inciting the riot and his erratic behavior made him unfit to serve. Mike Pence refused to invoke Section 4, stating that it should only be used in cases of medical incapacity, not political disputes. However, Mike Pence also released a 3-page statement saying he did not have unilateral authority to change the results of the election. Alright, so now we have two arguments on the involuntary removal of the president and under what conditions we remove a president from office. Argument 1. Stick to what the Constitution says from 250 years ago and only have the requirement of removal by mental or physical incapacity to fulfill their duties. And on the other hand, the argument is we need to expand our definition of how to identify who is unfit for the presidency. Because the honest truth, our forefathers intended on the Constitution to be a living document so that it fit the needs of the time. Another way to think about it is the former argument holds to a status quo of institutional law and claims business as usual, and the latter argument leads to us thinking of what limits should be put on the president, especially if the actions of the president is clear and intent on destroying government departments without due process. This leads me to think, should the 25th Amendment have a broader scope around safety of the American people to protect them against violent acts by the current administration? And more importantly, do these changes determine whether Mr. Trump is mentally fit or healthy enough to sit as president? He is 79 years old after all. Back in 1967, when the 25th Amendment was being ratified, government officials discussed very specific circumstances for which the president may be removed forcibly from his position. Before the amendment was even thought of, there was nothing in place to remove a president from office once he was sworn in. Policymakers at the time had said if a president was mentally incapacitated, there was no clear mechanism to remove him from office unless they resigned or were impeached. So Congress passed the amendment that would allow for the cabinet, vice president, and Congress to decide on removing the president from power or not. My point is that the amendment is a tool that can protect the president's position from people who are unexperienced and destructive. In this day and age, we have to fight to keep the idea of rights in our country alive. This current administration has been clear by their actions that they absolutely do not swear to uphold the Constitution or protect the U.S. or humanity, even under oath. One more thing to say before I go. While the 25th Amendment has been used for temporary transfers of power, no U.S. president has ever been officially declared unfit under Section 4. However, it has been considered in times of crisis, showing its importance in maintaining government stability. Why hasn't Section 4 never been used? Well, one, political resistance. Removing a sitting president is a serious step, and the cabinet members are usually loyal to the president who appointed them. Number two, there's a high bar for removal. So even if the vice president and cabinet invoke Section 4, the president can challenge it, requiring another 2/3 vote in Congress to finalize removal. A temporary medical transfer are preferred. Instead of using Section 4, presidents who are undergoing medical procedures typically use Section 3 to voluntarily transfer power for a short time. And that's where we'll end here, folks. I have a second part of this episode and more coming out this month. Thanks for listening to this episode. It's been rewarding to put these videos together and raise critical questions of what the constitutional amendments mean. Our mission is to get people to act as we face the crisis in our social, economic, and environmental sectors of human civilization. You can find our new Voice for the Voiceless podcast episodes with our channels linked down below. While you're there, click that like button and subscribe. It really helps our channel. Feel free to reach out with any questions or comments you may have. And a big shout out to my boy Lumpy at Faceless Studios. Together we create entertainment media and laughable content. Watch us react to One Piece, a seafaring adventure of pirate dreamers and well-wishers. And remember, here we are faceless.